notes down here at the bottom of the page. So we know that we are trying to solve, which are roots, zeros, x-intercepts. So we're trying to find the x-intercepts for this quadratic function. So the first thing that we would do is subtract 15 from both sides. So we're going to have 2x squared equals. Make sure you put this in your calculator correctly. If you're using that, that's negative 35 minus 15. Oops, sorry. Negative 35 minus 15. So we get negative 50. We're going to divide by 2. The only thing that's being squared is the x, so I have to get it alone. So I got x squared equals negative 25. And then I'm going to square root both sides. But when I take the square root of negative 25, it tells me that it's a non-real answer. Okay? The opposite of real is imaginary, or the opposite of real is fake, but we call that imaginary. It's the same idea. So what we're going to do is right up here at the top of your notes, we're going to show this, the square root of a negative 1. We know that that's negative 1 times positive 1, and those are not a pair. If I took the square root of 4, we know that that's 2 times 2, or negative 2 times negative 2. This is a pair, this is a pair, which is why we get positive or negative 2, plus or minus 2. Okay? But when we do the square root of a negative 1, this is not a pair. I can't take anything out, but your calculator won't accept that as an answer. So the square root of a negative 1 we write as an I, which means imaginary. So the square root of a negative 1 is I. Or down here, I equals the square root of a negative 1. It's not negative 1, it's the square root of a negative 1. Okay, so how do we write this? So I'm going to write negative 1 times 25. And that still multiplies to be negative 25. And I'm going to circle this guy up. I'm going to cancel the 25. I know that's 5 times 5, so that's a pair. So in my answer, I'm going to say x equals plus or minus, because I'm taking a square root. I've got a pair of 5s, so I bring the 5 out. And then this is still under the square root, like this. But remember, we just spent time talking about how we don't write the square root of a negative 1, we write I. So my answer will actually be plus or minus 5, and that is really I. So this is my solution. I would have 5i or negative 5i as my two choices for x-intercepts. So now we're going to work number 2. We're going to subtract 13. So I've got 3x squared is equal to negative 36. And then I need to divide by 3. So x squared equals negative. That's a 12. And I'm going to go ahead and square root. So make sure we do negative 1 times 12. So we've got the negative, which is going to be our I. We'll circle it. It's not a pair, but it's not staying under. And 12 becomes 4 and 3. And 4 is 2 and 2. So what I'm going to bring out is a pair of 2's. I cannot leave the negative 1 under. It comes out as I. And then this 3 has its lone self, so it stays in jail. Nobody helped it break out, so it's stuck. Okay, so number 3, my first step is to add 8. So x squared is going to equal negative 36 plus 8, if I could type correctly. It's going to be negative 28. And now I'm ready to square root. Negative 1, circle it up, times 28. 28 is going to become 7 and 4. Sorry, that's a 7. And then the 4 is 2 and 2. So I'm going to say x equals plus or minus. I've got a 2. I've got an I. And the 7 has no friends. Nobody helped him break out, so it's going to be written just like this. And last but not least, we've got number 4, where we're going to subtract 128, so it's going to become negative on the other side. And we're going to divide by 2. That's going to be negative 64. So when I square root here, I've got negative 1 times 64. Again, we're circling the negative 1 because it will not stay under. And then 64 is 8 times 8, which is a pair, so I don't have to break it down to primes. I've got a pair. So there's an 8 coming out, an I coming out, and there's nobody, sorry, I should have crossed out 64. Nobody's left. So that means that's my solution. The square root's gone. These guys broke out. This guy comes out as an I. Nobody's left inside. So that's it. So the only difference in working when you have a negative is you're going to have to pull out an I for it. That's the only change to this lesson. Now, an imaginary number, which we haven't filled in up here, imaginary number will have an I with it. So that's like 2I, or negative 6I, or 1/3 I. All of those are imaginary numbers because they have an I connected. A complex number, important binomial, means 2 terms. So it's a binomial with an I included. What does that mean? I guess I should have changed my color here, sorry. So an I included, so we're going to have 2I minus 3. That's a complex number. You've got an imaginary piece and a real piece. 4/5 I plus 2. Imaginary, real, 2 separate pieces, so that's a complex number. Okay, now we're going to work on 2 tiny little parts here. We've got I squared. We need to know what it is, so we're going to do it right here. I squared means I times I, just like x squared means x times x. So we've got the same situation here, I times I. Now remember, I, we wrote it right there, is the square root of a negative 1. So I'm going to put negative 1 times negative 1. That's what I have happening. But we're going to condense this, so we're going to use 1 square root, and both of those guys are under it. But I want you to remember that I come out of a square root when I'm in a pair. I got a pair of 2's, a pair of negative 2's. So we're free. So right here, what you notice is under the square root, you have a pair. So they're going to come out and be free because there was a pair. So I squared is going to actually equal a negative 1. Not the square root. I squared is a negative 1 right here. I is the square root of a negative 1. Those are 2 different pieces of information. Okay? This will be used on our next lesson that you'll see in another video for the next day. Right here we're going to write, we're just practicing breaking down some square roots just in case. So we're going to circle this guy up. This is 2 and 2. So I'm going to get plus or minus the 2 that comes out, and the negative 1 comes out as I because it's under a square root. Okay, negative 8 is going to be negative 1 times 8. So there's my negative 1. 8 is going to be 4 and 2. And then 4 is going to be 2 and 2. So be careful here. I'm going to bring out 2. I got to bring out an I because that's circled. This guy is not crossed out, not circled. He did not break out of jail. So there's my solution there. When I do negative 3, I got negative 1 times 3. Now 3 is prime, so it doesn't have any friends and it's going to stay in. Negative 1 is not allowed to be in there. It comes out as I. So it's just I square root of 3. Okay, we're going to do negative 16. And 16 becomes 4 and 4. So I've got a pair. And I've got an I. And nobody's left inside. And last but not least, we got the square root of -5, which is a -1 times 5. So I'm going to circle up my -1. 5 is prime. It has no pairs, so it stays in jail. And -1 will always come out front as the I. I'm not going to be doing these. Don't worry about this. That's more pre-cal now. So that is imaginary numbers. It's pretty simple. They're not that tough. And there was an assignment in class. If you need help, you're welcome to come see me.